Hello friends, I'm the Pro, and today you'll see a story that will make you fall off your chair. The story tells of the day the High Priest and Zeno met. So, before embarking on this journey, don't forget to like the video because it helps me a lot. Subscribe to the channel by activating the notification bell, and also become a member to support me. It's super cheap and only a symbolic amount for those who support my work. Now buckle up and let's get started. Long before time had a name, before the gods, before the planets, before even the idea of life, there was only emptiness, and absolute nothingness, cold, silent, endless, but not all was absence. In this endless abyss, there was a presence and entity so ancient that even it itself knew its origin. This entity was the Daishinkan. He wasn't born. He simply appeared. He emerged as a point of consciousness amidst nothingness. In the first millennia, or perhaps it was seconds, who could say? Daishinkan simply existed, floating in the darkness, observing a non-existent universe, trying to understand the reason for his presence there. Over time, he began to understand something. He could shape the void. With a simple thought, he created particles, sparkles, structures of energy. They weren't planets or galaxies yet, but small shapes, as if he were learning to draw with his own thoughts. And each creation came with a feeling, as if it connected him to something greater, something he didn't yet understand. But the more he created, the more he felt something was missing. A lack of purpose. A lack of direction. It was then, in a moment of absolute silence, and the silence was the only constant there, he felt something different. A pressure in the air, as if the void were breathing. An invisible wave, followed by a crack, and then he saw it. Amidst the darkness, a small blue light, the size of a seed, appeared. But this light pulsed like a heart. And as he approached, Daishinkan felt a force so intense that his own thoughts nearly dissolved. That wasn't a star. It wasn't ordinary energy. It was someone. Daishinkan stood still. For the first time, he felt something that wasn't his own creation. And it was there, in that light that barely fit in the palm of his hand, that Zeno's first form appeared. But the most curious thing was, Zeno didn't speak, didn't create, didn't judge. He simply watched. Like a newborn child who doesn't understand the world, but feels everything. Daishinkan, intrigued, tried to communicate. He created shapes, vibrations, tried to channel energy to transmit thoughts. But Zeno simply watched. And then, something incredible happened. Without any gesture, without words, Zeno made one of the small fragments created by Daishinkan simply disappear. Not explode. Not transform. Disappear. As if it had never existed. In that moment, Daishinkan understood that small creature, seemingly fragile, had absolute power. It could erase existence. That was the power of pure nullification, of destruction without consequence. And suddenly, the void was no longer so silent. Daishinkan, for the first time, felt fear. But he also felt fascination. He didn't see Zeno as a threat, but as the key to something greater. With that power, the universe would no longer need to be a sea of lost creations. There could be balance. There could be order. And it was then that, voluntarily, he knelt before that small creature and said, not with words, but with intention, "You are the king. And I will be your guide." Thus was born the most unlikely alliance in existence, the wisest being of nothingness serving the most innocent and destructive being of everything. And that was only the beginning. After that first surreal encounter, time was no longer just a sensation for Daishinkan. Now he had a purpose. He had a function. He was no longer just a consciousness playing with particles, he was the mentor of the most powerful being in existence. And Zeno? Zeno was an enigma. A walking enigma. A being who, even without knowing how to speak, conveyed orders with a simple look. But the most intriguing thing was that he didn't seem to know what he was. He showed no pride, no anger, no fear. Just curiosity. In the first cycles, if we can call them that, Daishinkan dedicated himself to teaching Zeno what creation was. He showed that emptiness could transform into light, that energy could be molded like cosmic clay. He created the first prototypes of reality, small systems with simple physical laws. One time flowed slowly, another accelerated for no reason. In one, the particles sang. In another, gravity pulled upward. Everything was a test. And Zeno? He watched with that same empty but fixed gaze. Like a child who understands nothing, but feels everything. And then, something strange began to happen. Zeno began pointing. At some systems, he smiled. At others, he just looked and, puff! They ceased to exist. It was as if he were choosing, not logically, but instinctively. And that fascinated Daishinkan. It was as if the supreme boy was driven by a sense of right and wrong that wasn't based on rules, but on something more primal. And that was when the priest understood, Zeno wasn't a creator. He was the judge. The filter. What stays, lives. What bothers, disappears. Daishinkan then began to create with more care. He developed larger, more complex universes. He created structures that imitated life. Beings with reason, with forms, even with choices. Everything was an experiment. And Zeno, increasingly, showed reactions. Sometimes he laughed when he saw a civilization destroy itself. Other times he looked bored when everything was too harmonious. He liked chaos, but not just any chaos. He liked the kind that made things move. The kind that made the universe spin. One day, Daishinkan created an entire universe with 13 intelligent races. Each in a different galaxy. All with the potential to evolve, expand, and collide. He presented this universe to Zeno as a gift, a proof of his devotion. Zeno was silent for a long time. He watched the energy flow, the planets spinning, the wars starting, the alliances forming, and then he smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile, but it made the priest tremble. It was the first time Zeno had expressed something that resembled approval. And in that moment, Daishinkan felt he was on the right path. He understood that his role was not just to guide the king. It was to entertain. To teach. To challenge. He was the architect of a cosmic game, and Zeno was the player. But this game had bizarre rules. Because Zeno was not rational. He did not understand consequences. If a galaxy exploded, he found it beautiful. If a race created a perfect symphony, he might find it boring. It was like dealing with a child god, bored, unpredictable, but with a button that could erase everything with a snap of his fingers. Daishinkan began to fear this. What if Zeno lost interest? What if one day he decided everything should disappear? It was a question he never dared ask, but one that weighed on his mind like a silent threat. So he made a decision: divide creation. Expand the game. Create more universes, more realities, more pieces on the board. The more options, the less boredom. The more boredom avoided, the greater the chance of keeping Zeno entertained and the multiverse alive. That's how the idea of the 12 universes was born. But there were still missing pieces to balance this board. Daishinkan would need helpers. Guardians. And maybe, apprentices. Comment for part 2.